Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. government seized control of insurance giant AIG, American International Group, in an unprecedented $85 billion bailout. The Federal Reserve made the deal Tuesday to save AIG from collapse in what the New York Times describes as the most radical intervention in private business in the central bank's history. The move to lend AIG up to $85 billion for 2 years in exchange for nearly 80% of its stock effectively nationalizes one of the central institutions in the crisis that has swept through financial markets this month. AIG found itself on the verge of bankruptcy largely because of complex securities that are tied to subprime home mortgages and which plunged in value as the nation's housing crisis deepened. The bailout marks a turnaround by the Bush administration and the Fed, who just 2 days earlier had refused to risk taxpayer money to prevent the collapse of Lehman Brothers or the distressed sale of Merrill Lynch to Bank of America. It also comes on the heel of a government bailout just over a week ago of mortgage giants Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and 6 months after the Fed bailed out Bear Stearns by helping to finance a sale to J.P. Morgan Chase. The unprecedented run of events has altered the shape of Wall Street and brings the total amount of government rescue efforts to stabilize the financial system and housing market to about $900 billion. For more, we're joined by two guests. Nomi Prinz is a former investment banker turned journalist. She used to run the European Analytics Group at Bear Stearns. She's now a senior fellow at Demos. She's the author of 2 books, Other People's Money, The Corporate Mugging of America, and Jacked, How Conservatives Are Picking Your Pocket. Michael Hudson is the president of the Institute for the Study of Long-Term Economic Trends, an economics professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and author of Super Imperialism, the Economic Strategy of American Empire. He was chief economic advisor to Congressmember Dennis Kucinich. He is currently, as well as when he was presidential candidate. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Nomi Prinz, let's begin with you. The bailout of AIG.
The bailout of AIG is an example of the government having to step in and clean up a mess. It is not so much that subprime mortgages fell and that caused some losses to AIG. AIG was acting not simply as an insurance company, it was acting as a speculative investment bank / hedge fund, as was Bear Stearns, as was Lehman Brothers, as is what will become Bank of America Merrill Lynch. So you have a situation where it's bailing out not just the money, but taking on the risk of items it cannot even begin to understand, because if it had understood them, this would never have gotten to the point to which it has gotten.
How did it get to this point? How did it go beyond insurance?
In AIG and in Lehman and with Merrill and every other company on Wall Street that has faltered or is faltering, it's about taking on too much leverage, in borrowing to take on the risk, and borrowing again and borrowing again. 25 to 30 times the amount of capital, the amount of money that they had to basically back the borrowing that they were doing. Human, regular borrowers cannot do this. This is something that is an item only of the banking industry. And not only was all that borrowing happening, but there was no transparency to the Fed, to the SEC, to the Treasury, to anyone who would have even bothered to look as to how much of a catastrophe was being created, so that when anything fell, whether it was a subprime mortgage or whether it was a credit complex security, it was all below a pile of immense, interlocked, incestuous borrowing. And that's what is bringing down the entire banking system.
Michael Hudson, we're talking government bailout, which means taxpayers stuck with the bill. Do you think this is the right move?
No, it's the worst possible move, and it puts the class war back in business with a vengeance. Wall Street's been preparing for this for years because every financial analyst knows that the debts can't be paid. And the question that Wall Street has, if you're going to take a gamble on bad debts that can't be paid, how are you going to come out a winner? And there's only one way of coming out a winner, and that's to make the government bail you out. This has been known for years because it's inherent almost in the mathematics of compound interest. Every banker I know knew that the loans they were making were going to go bad. They were trying to sell them to somebody else, ultimately expecting them to end up with some sovereign wealth fund. And now you had at the beginning of the show McCain saying that this is the result of fraud and incompetence. The government's now bailed them out, but by bailing them out, Wall Street was coming to terms with the bad debts. When Bear Stearns went under and when Lehman Brothers went under, this began to wipe away the bad debts. And when the debts exceed the ability to pay, there's only one thing any economy can do, and that's wipe them out. Instead, the government is trying to keep the fiction alive. And what Paulson did yesterday in bailing out AIG was to try to lock in whoever is the next president, not only to further bailouts of Wall Street, ostensibly to protect the public money, but to make it impossible to write down the debts of the 4 million homeowners that are expected to default this year, impossible to write down the debts of companies that have issued junk bonds, impossible for the country to get rid of this excess of debts that can't be repaid, and you're having really a war now of creditors against debtors. And this is what Wall Street's been preparing for. It needed an emergency to do it. It's really not an emergency at all. This has been building up for many years. Everybody expected it, and breathlessly now, the Secretary of Treasury.
But of course, the argument was, if you don't bail out AIG, it could lead to a global financial meltdown. It's a meltdown of the gamblers, as Naomi said. These are people who've gambled. You had McCain saying they're gamblers. If these people have gambled, we're talking about derivative trades, billions of dollars of bets on which way interest rates will go, billions of dollars of bad loans beyond the ability of debtors to pay. Why on earth would you want to bail out these creditors? So what would happen if you didn't? Then you would prepare the ground for writing down the debts of the homeowners that have no way of repaying the exploding mortgages whose interest rates are going to be jumping up this year. You'd be able to bring the debts down to the ability of the economy to pay, and you'd save these 4 million homeowners from defaulting and being kicked out of their houses. Now they're going to be kicked out of the houses. The houses will be vacant. The cities are going to now say, gee, we're going to have to cut the property taxes to enable the debts to be paid to save the financial system. So if they cut the property taxes, they're going to have to cut back local expenditures, local infrastructure. The economy is being sacrificed to pay the gamblers. Naomi Prinz, how has Wall Street changed, and how does this meet everyday people?